Welcome to the 200th anniversary of the village of Tariffville. I'm John Nagy from the Tariffville Village Association.
And I'm Frank Haviland, one of the founders of the Village Association.
We're the Godfathers, and we have a few more Godfathers here today. David Vane, born in the village, born above Farrell's Market. And let's see, we got any other old timers here? Well, David takes the prize for the oldest citizen of the village here today. Well, welcome everybody. The official naming of Tariffville happened on April 14 in 1825. That's where the cornerstone was laid for the tariff manufacturing. So today we're going to talk about the history of Tariffville. And those of you who were born here can probably teach me a few things. And those of you who are just interested in hearing about everything, I hope you hear a lot of nice things today. Before Tariffville was Tariffville, Native Americans lived here. Simsbury was founded in 1670, and at that time the colonists came over from Windsor, and this area was called, from the colonist point of view, was called the Falls, because we didn't actually have waterfalls, but we had rapids, and they referred to the rapids as the falls. And this image that you see here on the screen is artwork by Jeffrey Ackmore, who since passed away. I don't know if Cynthia, are you here today? No. Cynthia said she might come by probably later. But Jeffrey did this work many years ago, which shows a man with a horse and a cart crossing the river. And one distinction of Tariffville was the water was shallow enough in some areas that you could actually wade across or take your horse across, or in this case, take a wagon across. So if people wanted to get to Simsbury, across the river, they would come through Tariffville, because you could actually walk across in certain areas. Later on, this area of Tariffville had another name. Frank will tell us about that.
Well, for a while, most of the land around the village was owned by a guy named Griswold, who lived actually over near St. Andrew's Church in Bloomfield. It was all one town at that time, and so it was called Greenfield Village, Griswold Village, and they had a little factory there that made, he bought iron rods from western Connecticut and heated them up and drew them out to make wire, and then he cut the wire into short pieces, and he had workmen poke the wires into a flat piece of wood about this big and make a thing to card wool. And so you could comb the wool until you get all the fibers going straight, and then you could spin it to make yarn. And he was doing fine, selling lots of it. There were all kinds of sheep running around. But then a guy in Hartford figured out a machine that would put the wires in by machine, and he got wiped out. So then they started looking for something else to do, and that comes up on the next slide. Okay.
So there's an example of change where you start with a carding factory, and then technology takes over, and all of a sudden you don't have a carding factory because it's become automated. So Tariffville is remarkable for all the changes that have happened here, and that's the first one that we'll talk about today. Now this is a very interesting map. I personally love maps, and this one in particular shows the town of Simsbury in 1730. If you look in the middle here, along here, this is the mountain, Talcott Mountain, or sometimes they call it Simsbury Mountain.
Show them where north is, so the map is cockeyed.
Yes, so Granby would be on this side going north, and Avon would be on this side going south. And also parallel to the mountain is the Farmington River, coming from Avon through Simsbury. It does a little loop-de-loop here, that's called Pickerel Cove. And then it heads east, where it cuts through the mountain to go to Windsor. And if you see on the map there, there's a sign that says it's the Falls. And over here it says the Griswold Farm. So this area here is actually what we call Tariffville today. But on the 1730 map, it was called the Falls. If you were one of the original colonists, you probably came from Windsor. And if you came from Windsor, you might come over here by Hatchet Hill Road, and then come over to Tariffville that way. Or you might come from the Bloomfield side of the river and take Mountain Road. And Mountain Road came right through town and crossed the river at what is now the Main Street extension where it joins Main Street itself. And there was a bridge there for many years, which was washed out in 1955. But in 1730, they had no bridge there. So but you could cross the river there. If you wanted to get to, if you were living over here in Simsbury and you wanted to get over across the river, you might cross it in Tariffville and come back down here. There was a ferry at one point down on Ferry Lane. I'm not sure when that ferry started, but the two places you could cross the river were in Tariffville and by ferry, and I suppose by canoe. Let's see what else.
This is an article from the Connecticut Current in 1825. It announces the laying of the cornerstone of what became the Tariffville Manufacturing Company to make carpet here in America. They laid the cornerstone in April. They were making carpet by Christmas. So they really put Humpty Dumpty together in a big hurry. The whole idea was the town, the federal government made a tariff of 33 1/3% on imported woolen goods from England. And between the expensive boat ride and the extra 33%, some workers suddenly figured out that they could build carpet with hand looms and still beat that price. And so that's why they created the mill in the first place. And they brought over from Scotland some cottage weavers. In Scotland and Ireland and England, they were building these giant factories with power looms. And the poor guys who used to do the looming in their cottages were put out of work. So they were very happy to come over. So they not only built the mill, they built the cottages for all these people to live in. And if you go to the Simsbury Cemetery on the top of the hill, you'll find some tombstones that say Paisley, Scotland is where this person would come from.
And the entire mill down there was built in less than a year?
Well, no. That was the original mill picture. They kept adding pieces as they started adding functions and other things. You'll see it as we get through it. And some of the pictures here on the wall will explain it.
So this is the mill as it appeared in around 1836. The large building in the center would have been the main mill, and then you see the other buildings surrounding it. So here's the main mill. Here's some of the surrounding buildings, and all of these burned down. All of this here burned down
Later.
in 1867. 1867.
Seven.
But this is how it looked in 1836. Some of the buildings that survived were on Red Hill Road. These buildings here, shown on the 1836 map, still exist on Red Hill Road. And this area down here became Elm Street, and this area over here, Mountain Road, and then it would have gone around to Main Street, coming around the back here. So this is the Red Hill Road buildings were worker housing. Now, as I said, I do love maps, and this one is a very favorite one of mine. If you're looking, if you were standing with your back to the mill, this is the current building here at the mill. If you're standing in front with the mill behind you, this is Main Street, and this is Elm Street, and this is Mountain Road. This is the river. It had two bridges, one at the Main Street extension and one on Tungus Road. And both of those washed out in 1955 and were replaced by one single bridge in this area, the Route 189 bridge. The Route 189 bridge was in this area, and then of course the 189 highway was built along here. The railroad came over from the canal line, and there was a station on what is now Main Street Extension. And then there was a spur that came down close to the river to bring the railroad all the way down to the mill. And it ended at the mill at this time in 1850. The river itself was diverted through this canal, and the water from the canal went all the way into the main structure of the mill. Now, some of these buildings are the ones you see on the 1836 map, but this large structure was built originally
1840.
1840. It subsequently burned down and was rebuilt on the same site. So we'll be visiting it today for a tour after this. And that is the site of the mill as it was reconstructed for the power looms. I mentioned worker housing on Red Hill Road. This is Red Hill Road. Worker housing still exists. And this is Elm Street. There's worker housing on Elm Street. And this is Tungus Place with worker housing. And this is Tungus Road with some of the mill supervisors housing. Another interesting thing is that the first Catholic church in town was on Mountain Road. It wasn't St. Bernard's, it was
St. Peter's.
St. Peter's. St. Peter's, yeah. And later, St. Bernard's came later. And here it shows the proposed Episcopal church. They're showing it, this church, they're showing it as proposed to be built on Center Street. It was later built on Church Street when Church Street was constructed. And then, let's see, another interesting fact on this map is that there's 3 schoolhouses shown. There's one right here, and there's another schoolhouse here, and another schoolhouse here. So there were 3 schoolhouses in the village at this time, and one was proposed to be built, the 4th one was proposed to be built on Center Street. It was subsequently built on Church Street after Church Street was constructed, and it was a 4-room schoolhouse, which is called the Tariffville District School, and it comprised enough classrooms so that they didn't need 3 small schoolhouses. They could have 1 large one. Anything else on this map you want to
No, it's
mention?
time to go on to the next one.
Okay. I get distracted by these maps, I love maps. Go ahead.
These are some of the buildings that were built for the workers to live in. This is on Tunks's Place, and you can see it's actually 4 units all glued together. And this is down on Tunks's Road, and this is one of the 3 or 4, actually there were 4 originally, for the managers of the mill to work. This is the Mitchelson house. Ariel Mitchelson was a farmer, tobacco farmer, who owned a lot of the land in the general area of Tariffville in the 1890s. And he was the first one that was brave enough to try to grow tobacco under a tent. The federal government had been pestering tobacco farmers for years, saying, if you put a tent up, it makes the climate inside the tent very much like the land of Sumatra, where all that good, expensive tobacco's coming from. Try it. Farmers don't like to try things. They just do it the way that it always worked. They didn't want to gamble. But he finally said, all right, I'll try it. And he did it up on the heights. And it was a complete success. And it exploded. Everybody was doing tobacco under tents.
Oh, and I should mention that, raise your hand, Sherry Lindeman is the current owner of that house, and also past president of the Village Association. Let's give her a little hand.
Oh. Okay, this is just on Main Street, a Greek Revival house. When the railroad came to town, it was only came to get the carpet and take it away to sell it someplace. But the fact that the train came led people and farmers in the area to come to Tariffville to unload their produce and get it shipped off to some market someplace. They didn't care. That in turn brought people to came into Tariffville to sell things to the farmers, like hardware and tools and things like that. And this is the house that was built by the son of the first guy that opened a hardware store. He built the house you can barely see in the corner, and his son wound up building this one. So it was a very successful hardware business.
And the current owner of that house is Cheryl Strider. Is Cheryl here today? I think she's going to join us later. And her significant other, Jim Schachman, are living there. And they've recently finished renovating this house, done quite a nice job on it over the last few years. And they split their time between this house and another house they have out in Washington State. This is a very cool house, right across the street. I call it the gingerbread house. The technical name for it is the Carpenter Gothic Cottage. We have a relative here today, Jane Grant. Raise your hand. Tell me who lived in that house when you...
My great uncle George, and then after he passed away, it was my great cousin Gertrude Perry. Last name was Perry.
So Jane's great uncle George, and who was the other one?
Perry. And then Gertrude Perry.
Oh yeah, and then
My
Gertrude.
dad, Charles Perry, it was his first cousin.
Okay, So we got some deep roots here in the village. I love this little house. It has such a nice design. Tariffville has architectural styles of every variety. We seem to have at least one of everything, if not two. And in terms of worker housing, we have actually quite a few. Oh, and the other thing I should say is that we mentioned that the Mitchelsons were big in the tobacco business and had the large house that Sherry lives in now. But they also built smaller houses for their family. And this is one of the smaller houses that the Mitchelsons built for family members. Now here's a very cool house. It's the only brownstone house in town, although there is a former cafe, which is brownstone, but this is the only freestanding house. There is a duplex. We believe it was built by the Ketchen family. And when the Ketchens came to town, there was an uncle who was a mason, and he taught his nephews the stone business. So they built, when they started in the stone business, the Ketchens built a lot of the foundations. You'll find in town that there were a lot of foundations built with brownstone. Very few houses built with brownstone, but a lot of foundations built with brownstone. And we believe that this was their home. And they also had a monument shop where they built funeral monuments. You'll see some of them in the St. Bernard's Cemetery. And we believe that this was where they would have had a display of monuments and a monument shop in the back. So this is a very cool house. Now the Ketchens, when they got into the business in a big way, after the Civil War, they built a lot of brownstones in Simsbury. For instance, they built the town hall. This would have been late 1800s. They built the town hall, they built the Ensign House, and we have the current owner of the Ensign House here today, Ika Scully. Raise your hand. Ika's with the Historical Society, and she and her husband bought the Ensign House when it might have been destroyed, and she saved it. Oh my gosh. Let's applaud her for that. You know, there was a house across the street that was destroyed. It was a brownstone house across the street from the Ensign House, and it was destroyed. But Ika and her husband saved this house, so God bless you, Ika. I appreciate it so much. While I'm on the subject of the Historical Society, Barbara Frere, raise your hand, from the Simsbury. Huh? Barbara Strong. I got an old friend named Barbara Frere. Barbara Strong from the Simsbury Historical Society. Raise your hand. The Simsbury Historical Society has collaborated with us on a lot of events, and it's been a wonderful collaboration. So glad you could come today.
Do we know where the brownstone was sourced? Did it come from the Portland quarries, or was it in fact this Ketchen quarry?
Quarry Road.
So that's an excellent question. As Frank said, Quarry Road. Go ahead.
No, that's the end of the answer.
Well, there's more to it, but go ahead.
Except for maybe brownstone of this church.
Yes, that's where I was going. They built just about every brownstone building, including a lot of the buildings at Dino Nobel and St. Victor. They built a lot of that. The only thing around here that they didn't build really was Trinity Church.
What about the firehouse?
They built the firehouse. They did. Yeah. It was built as a tobacco warehouse. But when Trinity Church was constructed, it was right after the Civil War. Trinity Church was built in 1872, and the Ketchen the Elder and Ketchen the Younger had been both wounded in the Civil War, and they were still recovering from their wounds by 1872. So they may have worked on this church as laborers, but not as builders. Later, their business took off later in the 1800s. Their heyday was in the later 1800s. But this, so to your question, Trinity Church was built with Portland brownstone, and most everything else was built with Ketchen Quarry brownstone.
Thank you.
This is a very cool shot of a building that doesn't exist anymore. This is the Tariffville District School. This is a school that was constructed to consolidate the 3 smaller schoolhouses. This school had a couple of interesting facts. It had central heat. It was the first school in town that had a boiler. And another interesting thing, it was one of the first schools in the state that had a library. The library consisted of basically what we would call the Encyclopedia Britannica. That was the library, but it was unique insofar as it was one of the first in the state to have a library. Now this house was subsequently replaced, the schoolhouse was subsequently replaced by Tariffville School, 1825. Tariffville School is enjoying its 100th anniversary this year at the same time that Tariffville is enjoying its 200th anniversary. And there'll be a celebration at Tariffville School in September to mark that time. And Tariffville itself will have a second celebration that weekend of September 27th. I'll leave this one for Frank.
This is a picture taken shortly after the fire of 1867 that leveled almost everything that was in the mill. They had many, many buildings doing all the different things of the steps and process heading towards actually making carpet with a loom. You had to card the wool, you had to wash the wool, you had to do this, you had to do that, you had to make it into yarn, put it on bobbins. And so they had all these buildings. And one night, apparently, they're guessing, they had a machine that would do the carding of the wool, and they think that a piece of something hard and sharp, perhaps metal, was lost in there, and it snapped and made a spark and started a fire. At night, it was like midnight or something when it all started. And so they put out the alarm to go, call the fire department. The fire department, nearest one, was in Hartford. And it didn't get here until 9:30 in the morning. By which time there was nothing really to do except put out the smoldering. The place was wiped out. You can see, though, that some parts of the building have survived. There's a wall there in the front, and then the whole wall going straight back. When we go to the mill later this afternoon, you'll see that that wall is still part of the mill. They rebuilt the building, mostly using the bricks that had collapsed during the fire. And they built it exactly the same way that it originally had been built. And so the whole thing was just reconstructed, and you'll be able to see that picture in the corner. It's right in the lobby, in the front of the building. This is the '55 flood. Many of you were around when this happened, but it did the job that the fire couldn't quite do. The fire left a few buildings, and the flood took care of all of them. There's nothing left but this, the mill today. Now this mill was built in 1840, and it was built solely as a factory to house a whole bunch of heavy-duty metal looms powered by the river to make carpet. It was pure industrial stuff. But look at how fancy they made it. It's got filigree on the bricks, it's got these tall windows. You needed the windows because they didn't have any lamps to light the place up. You needed lots of sun. It's also a very high building. You can see how tall the windows are. It was one floor, massive floor, because it had to haul tons and tons of these power looms and all of the claptrap that went with them to run them. And all that stuff hanged from the ceiling. So the ceiling had to be strong and high. And there were long shafts that went along the ceiling with wheels on them. And the wheels had leather belts that went down to the looms. And so there was this constant whirligig stuff. And meanwhile, down in the basement was a turbine that drowned its own wheels and things. So you can imagine being in there listening to them make big wool carpeting, that it must have been absolutely deafening.
I'm a tenant of the building, and the wood beams you're speaking of are absolutely huge. Are they chestnut to your knowledge?
With the beams?
Yeah.
Probably yes, because it was rebuilt in 1874, and there was plenty of chestnut around. The blight hadn't arrived until like right after 1900, so there was plenty of chestnut. Most of the tobacco barns are built out of chestnut frames too. Yeah, David?
You may mention the water, because I was here during the flood of 55, went above those white shades. So the water went all the way up to the top of those windows in the Tariffville manufacturer.
Yeah.
And Tariffville was, now you may mention this too, was surrounded by water. And so the only way we got our food and everything was helicopters that fly at the Tariffville school. But we were totally surrounded by water, and the girls' camp all came and lived with the families here, because there was a tobacco girls' plant, and they all lived with the families here, so.
Ah.
yeah.
This is too elaborate to see. There's one on the back wall there. But the mill is 185 years old. It was built in 1840. And until the mid-1980s, at any given time, there was only one company in the mill, and it owned the whole building or it rented the whole building. But it kept changing because the Industrial Revolution in the 1850s was just getting off the ground. And so they would build a factory and do everything wonderful, and then 2 years later or 3 years later it would collapse. And it would go back and forth and back and forth. And what was the interesting part is the carpet company never survived the fire of 1867, but they owned the property. And so when it was rebuilt in 1874, they were the landlord. The company that put it together had the cash, but then they had, essentially, they took a mortgage out from the mill owners. And so every time a company went under, the property returned to the mill. And back to the mill, back to the mill, back to the mill. And all of those things are one company after another going through it. And when we're at the mill, I'll walk through that whole chart and show you what happened. But it was only Stephen Stang who bought the mill in 2003, decided we're going to divide it all up into office space and try to fill the mill building with all kinds of different businesses, and it's been very successful. But prior to that, there was just one tenant at a time. Yeah.
Originally, the mill was powered by water.
Right.
And for these subsequent businesses, each one that came in, I assume that the mill was continued to be powered by water up until a certain point. Do you know about when that changed and what it changed into?
Well, it was powered by water all the way up until, I can't read it. Like in the 1890s. And the reason was, in the 1890s, the government passed another tariff act, raising the tax on what do they call it, lace from England by 60%. Well, the company in England that was making it decided they'll buy the factory. And so they came here and they were making lace. But they didn't need all of this massive weight and you don't use a loom to do it. You have women sitting at a thing with juggling, wires crossing, doing a complicated process to make lace. But you don't need heavy industrial equipment. So he actually built a second floor, which is now there, but it doesn't have to have any great strength. It's the ceiling that has the strength to carry all the original equipment to run the water-powered mills. So then electricity came along, and so nobody needed the power anymore. You want to talk about the railroad? Yeah.
So on the 1850 map, you see the Tariffville station coming over from the canal line in Simsbury. The canal line is the current bicycle trail. And it came over in the area approximately where the Simsbury transfer station is. Came over to Tariffville and stopped here, and they constructed a station here. And this is on the Main Street extension. The track going to the right would be in the area of the road, which now goes to Tariffville Park. So we are facing in the direction of the west. Simsbury would be the track going to Simsbury would be the track on the left. Going to East Granby would be the track on the right. And then over time, the track was extended to Hartford down what is now the Route 189 right-of-way. However, prior to the construction of Route 189, the railroad was elevated as it went through Tariffville. And I'll show you something now, which shows how the track crossed in front of the mill. So this would have been 1871. By 1871, the track was going all the way to Hartford. And
So how did they make deliveries or pick up deliveries from the mill?
well, they had a side track which went down to the mill level. This would have been the main line going to Hartford. On the map, on the 1850 map, you can see the station and you can see the side track. But this was built a little later. So the side track still exists. It would have been at the ground level of the mill. But this was how you got to Hartford. Frank?
Yeah. This is the famous train wreck of 1878. There was a religious revival in Hartford, and then when it ended about 9:30 at night, everybody piled onto the train, and they were all headed out to western Connecticut, to wherever they had come from. And when the train crossed the bridge in Tariffville, right behind Governor's Bridge, it fell through the frame of the bridge, and everybody wound up in the river. In January, at midnight. It was an incredible mess. And luckily, 70 people were injured and 14 of them actually died. But it was, midnight in January, and there were no EMTs, there were no fire engines, it was nothing. It was 1878. So they had to save themselves. And they all kind of helped each other out of the train and walked back to the Tunks's hotel, where they all got at least out of the cold and waited for the help to finally come. Well, when it happened, one of the people on the train, who was an employee of the railroad, ran back to the Tariffville station and had a telegram sent out in both directions to say, help, we need some help. When that telegram message came into the Hartford station, in Union Station in Hartford, there happened to be a doctor in the building for some reason. And when he heard what was going on, he ran down to the corner of Capitol Avenue and Main Street where there was a pharmacy. And he knew that there were only a handful of telephones. They were brand new. They'd only been out for about a year. But the pharmacy had one, and most of the doctors had one. So he went to the pharmacy and had them make a call to all of the doctors and say, go to the train station, we need help. Well, that's now considered the very first 911 call in America.
So these are the piers on the, you can see them down in Tariffville Park. They went to East Granby. So they carried the train as it went to East Granby. And they're quite beautiful to look at. You get down at the Tariffville Park down by the playground. If you walk down to the river, you'll be able to see that view. You can also see those from the Main Street extension across the river.
And this is where the accident would have happened?
No, the accident happened further to the south, right behind the Governor's Bridge. So this was one of several bridges in town, but this was the one to East Granby. The one that was broken and where the train fell in the river, that was the line going to Simsbury. This is Trinity Church, as we talked about, 1872, Portland brownstone, and the Ketchens were in recovery from the Civil War at that time. This is the house where Joan and me raised our 4 children. Joan, raise your hand. So and one of my 4 children is here. Ani, please raise your hand. Where are you? Where are you hiding? Oh, there she is. And Ani still lives there in our old house. It's another example of another style of architecture. This one is called Italianate. This is a very cool thing. Those of you who are familiar with the Hubeline Tower, or the Highline Tower, this fellow named Bartlett built several towers. His were Bartlett Towers rather than Hubeline Towers. And one of the towers he built was in Tariffville. So if you were to take a walk up the mountain from the end of the Church Street extension, you could see the remainder of this structure, which actually burned. But there's a chimney which marks the spot. Originally it was built as an observation tower with some recreational activities, such as a bowling alley and a dance hall and some places to picnic. People would come out from Hartford on the train. They'd get off at Tariffville Station and either walk up or take a carriage up to the tower. And later the tower was sold to Antoinette Eno Wood. And she's a famous person in Simsbury with the name Eno, like Eno Hall. And this is her summer home. So she took an observation tower and turned it into her summer home. Unfortunately, at some point, it burned down. Like so many fires destroyed so many structures in Tariffville and in surrounding towns. It would have been pretty tough to get a fire truck up there. You could walk up, you could take a carriage up, but if a fire started in that structure, it would be pretty hard to put it out.
It was said that Mark Twain and the Reverend Churchill came out from Hartford and went up there to have some dancing and dinner and everything. Yes,
Mark Twain did live in Hartford at this time, and he is reported to have loved the towers. Not only did he come out to this tower, but he also, I read a story where he would walk the 12 miles with a friend to the Highline Tower on a Sunday afternoon. And I thought, well, when was the last time anybody here walked 12 miles on a Sunday afternoon? I thought, it must have been a pretty hardy group of people back then, right? So this is our main street. It hasn't changed too much. These buildings haven't changed too much since 1890. And they do represent at least 3 architectural styles on the same street. Is another example of all the wide variety of architectural styles in Tariffville. Where we're standing to take this photo, there used to be a hotel which also burned down. That was the Tunks's house. And to the left, we have replaced that with a gazebo, which you'll see a little later on. Now here's the present Cracker Barrel pub as it is shown in 1890, and I can't read it too well, but I see the post office was in that location at that time, and a store as well, right?
Yeah, that's where David was raised.
Yeah, David was born upstairs, but I think he might have just been, in 1890, he might have just been a thought in his grandfather's mind.
1910.
1910.
Farrell's Market was on the left, that was my grandfather's store, and the Avion was a bar, was on the right.
Yeah, very good.
I was born in Hartford. It's a bar. Lived up on the second floor.
Okay. Now here's a beautiful church. This is actually the second St. Bernard's church. The first one burned down. It was located in where is now the St. Bernard's Cemetery. It was the first St. Bernard's church. And after it burned, they built this one. It's a fantastic building. And has been saved or preserved by now the Manassas Church. So I was really worried when this church was empty for 5 years, and I was really worried as to what would happen to it. So the folks who are there now, the Manassas Church, they love the building. They call it their cathedral, and those of you who've been inside of it know how beautiful it is, and how wonderful it is that we were able to preserve it. We talked about tobacco. This is a building that was built by the Ketchens to sort tobacco. Now, if you were a builder in brownstone the way the Ketchens were, you had to find something to do for your masons in the wintertime. So they built this building to not only store tobacco, but to sort it. And if you see the this area here, this is skylights where the men would sort tobacco, grade it, and package it for shipping. Now here's another adaptive reuse of a building. So when the Ketchens got out of the tobacco business, they sold the building to the Tariffville Fire Company. And then later, when we joined with Simsbury, our fire departments are one with Simsbury now. The building was renovated and enlarged by Schoenhardt architects, who I think did a fabulous job. Adaptive reuse is a phenomenal thing, I think, for these old structures which otherwise might fall into disrepair. I'm thinking of the mill. I thank Stephen Stang for having renovated the mill and preserved a beautiful building, which when I was growing up was not beautiful to look at. So what he did with that building is so phenomenal. It just makes my heart feel really, really great. It's one of the things that I love about Tariffville is that so many of our buildings have been saved. Now talk about adaptive reuse and preservation. So what was identified, some of the characteristics of Tariffville which have been identified over the years are outdoor recreation, and here's some of our wonderful opportunities here in Tariffville. We're on the East Coast Greenway, which is the Maine to Florida bicycle route. We're on the Farmington River, which is wild and scenic, New England National Scenic Trail, and the National Register of Historic Places. So we have 4 areas of national significance, which, when you think of Tariffville, we're still manufacturing. We're still manufacturing at the mill, which was how we started, in 1825. But we're also a place for people to live. I mean, just, people want to live in Tariffville because of our community, because of our outdoor recreation. And so this is an attraction, a reason to be in Tariffville. It's why I'm still in Tariffville, is because of outdoor recreation. We wanted to mark the spot where these different trails come together, and that's the Tariffville Green. So we worked with the town to build a gazebo there, and this is the oasis on the trail, and it also marks the spot where all the trails cross. The bicycle trail comes through town, the river comes through town, and the New England National Scenic Trail also comes through town, and we're on the National Register of Historic Places. So we built a gazebo with the town, something historic looking. In our logo, which is courtesy of Mary Murphy of Sage River Graphics, our logo also represents those 4 areas of national recognition. You see the hikers, the bicyclers, the paddlers, and the historic-looking gazebo. Here's a hand-drawn map of all the trails. This one was drawn in 2003 when the Village Association started. And the town is in the process of updating this, making it into a professional map, and looking at Tariffville for where we're going to go in the next 200 years. The town of Simsbury has been working for the last 8 months on all the aspects of Tariffville which we want to improve and point the direction forward. You'll be seeing a new map as time goes by. Here's our coverlet, which takes some of the iconic images we've seen here tonight and puts them on a blanket that you can have on your couch if you want. We have one hanging in the back if you've seen it. I don't know if you've seen it, if you haven't seen it. And finally, here's one of the many reasons to come to Tariffville for those kayakers and canoers and fishers and hikers and bikers. We got it all here in Tariffville, and we thank you for coming out tonight.